Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional from the world of finance and fintech from Mumbai, India, Mr. Dushyant Singh. Dushyant, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleased to
Uh,
be here.
Thank you. Dushyant is the managing director of Playbook Partners India. So, Dushyant, before we come to Playbook Partners, a few questions for you. You have spent
Sure.
over 25 years across consulting, private equity, corporate strategy, and operating roles. As you look back, what were two or three inflection points that most shaped how you think about leadership today?
Thank you. That's an interesting question. I don't think I see my understanding of leadership as having gone through really inflection points.
Mhm.
It's more views that I picked up and that have got formed over a period of time.
Sure.
And I think there are really three things that define good leadership. I think obviously to be an effective leader, you need to, have a followership. And I think the followership builds up from these three things.
Yeah.
I think first is that people need to believe that you can add value to them.
Hmm.
And that could be, they're learning from you, they're getting career opportunities from you, their lives are becoming more fulfilled or better
Hmm.
because, or, careers are better, taking on a new trajectory because of you. So I think that's one. Second, I think people need to understand and believe that you have their interests in mind and that when they follow you, you are thinking of them as well, right? It's not what can that person do for me. It's also what, how can I take care of that person of my followers' interests
Hmm.
better. And third, they need to trust you.
Absolutely.
You need to be dependable. If something goes wrong, will you support them or will you throw them under the bus?
Hmm.
I think that's those are the three things that
Absolutely. Great
really,
response.
to my mind,
Yeah.
define
A great
good
response.
leadership.
You moved from advisory roles into more hands on operating and investing roles. What prompted this shift and how did it change your perspective on founders and CEOs?
Well, actually, I've moved on both sides of the table, as it were, from
Absolutely.
time to time. I started out in operating roles at in the media industry at Indian Express, moved to consulting, moved back to operating roles at IBM, and then again into advisory roles at Big Four and so on, McKinsey, and then back here. I think you pick up I think you gain from both. So at consulting teaches you about structured problem solving. It teaches you to deal with variety because the situation you're in, the person you're advising, the company you're working with is very different each time. So it teaches you flexibility, and it teaches you, analytical rigor. On
Hmm.
the other hand, operating roles really teach you about being flexible, about being fast,
Hmm.
about optimizing with limited resources, the value of good enough versus perfect.
Hmm.
And I think, you benefit from having been on both sides of the table because
Hmm.
of that.
Hmm.
And I think the last thing that you pick up, and that's across both, and in fact, funnily enough, I think that came more from my consulting experience, but I think the importance of building institutions.
Hmm.
And while it's maybe slightly counterintuitive, I think because consulting is such a person-dependent sector or industry,
Yeah.
uh, the fact that certain firms, and McKinsey is a standout example there, are able to build institutions and how they go about it is something I felt I learned, and I think that's very important for any organization,
Hmm.
whether you work in it, whether you're investing in it, or founding it.
Absolutely. Well said. Outside of boardrooms, you spend time photographing big cats in the wild. What has the jungle taught you about patience, timing, and leadership that business cannot?
Well, I'd love to say everything has a LinkedIn leadership moment to it, but I strongly believe that one should have interests that are varied. I
Correct.
love nature, and so for me, wildlife is about spending time with nature. It's about recharging batteries. Sitting in front of a fire in the middle of a jungle, hearing cheetah alarm calls because there's a big cat
Hmm.
prowling somewhere. That's that's interest, right? And
Hmm.
I read novels, I eat biryani, those are different. I'm a fan of history. These are all just different
Sure.
facets of a human being.
Yeah,
And I think it just adds to you as a person. I
absolutely.
don't think, sure, I'd love to say that being in the wild teaches you about patience and things like that. But I don't think everything has a sort
Has a
of
direct.
lesson to it.
Absolutely. Well said. Let's talk about Playbook Partners now, Dushyant. What gap in the Indian growth capital ecosystem led to the creation of Playbook as an operator driven firm rather than a traditional fund?
So two things. I think growth capital itself was a little bit of a gap.
Hmm.
There's a very large ecosystem of early stage investors, both venture capital funds as well as angels and family offices that do seed and early stage investing. Then there are, of course, the established large pension funds and private equity that do very late stage investing. But the mid growth stage was, we felt, an area where there was not enough capital and not, and therefore shortage of players, actually investing at that stage. Secondly, the operator part of it. There are a lot of ex-operators at the early stage, uh, but there was no other fund that was really operator-led or operator-driven or came from that background at the growth stage. And
Hmm.
the questions you need to address, or the challenges you face at growth and scale up,
Hmm.
are different from when you're just setting up the company
Yeah.
and at a very, very early stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we
And
felt
you,
that it needed an expert at this point.
absolutely right. And you describe yourself as practicing the art of scale. What does scaling well mean to you beyond revenue growth?
So why art, right? So first, I think scaling is not there's no algorithm to it.
Hmm.
So it's not a pure science. There are certain guidelines, but then each situation is different. And in that sense, there is an art to it, right? You
Hmm.
need to know what will work when. Um, I think beyond just revenue growth, right?
Hmm.
You need to be planning for the future as an
Hmm.
organization grows. Uh, the depth of talent you need starts to grow. At a very early stage, many startups would tend to be resource poor. You have people that you were able to hire at the beginning.
Hmm.
They have been with you right from the start, and obviously there is a loyalty to them. But as you scale up, often you need new capabilities and new skills
Hmm.
that you may not have had in the organizations. You need to bring in talent. You need to build an organization. You need to build, processes that support that kind of
Right.
organization, that attract and help you attract and retain talent. I
Hmm.
think, and it's really part of that institution building that needs to happen as you scale up. Because, it's not just about the next 6 months or 1 year or 2 years.
Yeah.
It's about, where will this business be 5 years or 10 years from today? And you need to
Hmm.
start planning for that
Hmm.
from this stage itself.
Absolutely. Well said. What common mistakes do growth stage companies make when transitioning from founder led hustle to institutional scale?
I wouldn't say these are mistakes that people commonly make, but these are challenges that
Hmm.
one has to overcome. I think one is that shift from being person dependent to being more of an institution,
Hmm.
where decisions are more devolved to the next level, and so on.
Hmm.
You have a deeper bench of talent, and decision making is then spread across them.
Hmm.
You are your process. You start to build in processes and a certain level of bureaucracy as the organization scales up. I think those are things that founders need to address as they scale up. Also, as they grow larger, they need to, the governance the governance needs to come in, the reporting systems, and so on. Not just financial, but
Hmm.
also operational.
Hmm.
Tracking performance across multiple functions and levels, rewarding people adequately across both tenures that they've been with the organization, but also levels and skills that they bring in.
Hmm. Hmm.
So all of those systems, the reporting, the governance,
Yeah.
the organization, all of
Yeah.
that needs to
Yeah.
get built out.
Great response. You also target digital India themes, Dushyant, such as distribution, disruption, and consumption. Which of these do you believe will define the next few years in our country?
All of them,
Okay.
from our perspective, digitalization and tech
Mm,
actually reduce friction in industries, right?
mm,
And that's the distribution element, right? It helps organizations get their businesses get their products and services to their customers. It helps customers access a wider range of opportunities.
mm,
That's the role of technology in distribution, right?
mm,
But technology also enables new ways of doing things, right? So
mm,
it can disrupt industries. So we've seen. I mean, we're looking at businesses that are changing how you diagnose health conditions, how
mm,
you manage productivity in manufacturing situations, and these are disruptive because technology is allowing you to do things today that could not have been envisaged
mm,
5 or 10 years ago.
mm,
So that's the disruption element. I think consumption is an underlying theme for India as a whole.
mm.
As we go past, we're already past 4,000. We're past $3,000 per capita.
Yeah.
As we get to three and a half, $4,000, that's about $2,000 per capita of consumption.
Mm,
It drives a shift from unorganized to organized. It drives more branded products, more premiumization, change
mm,
in the consumption mix, and all of that.
mm,
As we become more of a middle income country, right? You have
mm.
200 million people earning today, say about $4,000 or $5,000 per
Yeah.
capita, and that cohort will grow in size
Correct.
and their income will grow, right? So that whole consumption basket changes.
Hmm. And therefore, a follow-up question for you. Aspirational India is often discussed in broad terms. How do you at Playbook translate this concept into investable insights?
So a lot of this is some of the themes I talked about. We have two things that are happening. One, I talked about the income growing, but
Hmm.
secondly, we're also a very young economy,
Yeah.
right? Two-thirds of our population is under 35. The younger generation has grown up with much more access to technology.
Hmm.
Every generation consumes in a way that's different from the previous generation, right?
Hmm.
This access to technology and its impacts in terms of reducing friction as well as the increased income is creating opportunities for new players to target these young aspirational consumers
Hmm.
who today have access to a wider range of brands and products, want to consume them, want to consume things that are different from what their parents consumed.
Hmm.
I mean, we've invested in a BPC company that's riding on some of this change, right? I mean,
Hmm.
people are moving to branded products. They want international quality. They want a brand that's fresh, young, and appeals directly to them rather than the brand that maybe their parents or
Sure.
grandparents used, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That's just an example of the
Absolutely.
kind of
No, absolutely. And
ways in
how do
which
you
this is playing out.
support founders during difficult phases, such as slowdown in growth, leadership churn, or even a strategic pivot?
Our intention, and look, we've not, thankfully, touch wood, had this situation yet in our portfolio, but
Hmm.
our approach is to be a sounding board to founders. The reason we brought in, this operator set of capabilities and people who've either managed very large billion-dollar plus businesses or seen that scale up
Hmm.
from pretty much zero to that billion-dollar scale, or like in my case, worked with managements on bringing about change, helping them sort of navigate changes. Uh, I think the reason we put this set of capabilities together is that we have that ability to be a sounding board, to provide counsel, to provide insight, to be partners to the founders and management team as
Hmm.
they navigate challenges.
Hmm.
When our intention is not to tell people what to do, it's to
Hmm.
sort of help them, and partner with them along
Hmm.
the way.
Hmm. Very interesting. How important is founder self-awareness and ego management in the long-term value creation for the founder and for you?
Well, I think it's fundamental, right? As you scale up, you have to build out, as we said before, an institution.
Hmm.
And an institution has to be larger than the individual.
Hmm.
And you know, when I'm investing in a company, I have to think about not just where this company will be 3 years or 5 years from today, when
Hmm.
maybe I will be looking to exit my position. I need to look at where this company will be, 8 or 10 years from today,
Yeah.
because whoever I sell to will also need to see a roadmap for the next 5 or 10 years.
Hmm.
Otherwise, why would they invest, right? So it's very important, I think, for founders to be able to understand, where this business will go, to understand their limitations and
Hmm.
to be able to attract talent that complements them and helps them build out an
Yeah.
organization and an
Yeah.
institution.
Well said. Dushyant, I have time for two more questions for you. What is your perspective about board effectiveness? from your years advising funds and companies?
So I think there are two things that that you're solving for when you're selecting your board.
Yeah.
I think one is the capabilities that individual members bring in,
Hmm.
capabilities and expertise and
Hmm.
experience and so on. And secondly, the amount of time and the level of engagement that they have. You might have very strong capabilities, but if
Hmm.
somebody doesn't have the time, an interest to devote, then their effectiveness on the board
Hmm.
reduces. Secondly, I think it's very important for managements to engage with the boards
Hmm.
outside of the board meetings as
Hmm.
well, right? That's when you really, benefit from the expertise that individual members bring or they bring in as a group outside and beyond the board, the board meetings as well,
Hmm.
because the board is there to, to in some ways to help and guide the management, but also, of course, to look out for
Yeah.
the interests of the shareholders.
Hmm. And my last question for you. What advice would you give to founders who are scaling fast today but want to build companies that endure for decades?
Come and partner with us.
Absolutely.
That's really, those are the kinds of founders we want to partner with and work with. Again, like I said, sort of people who are building for a 10-year and beyond kind of horizon, not people who are building for the next 3 years or 5 years
Hmm.
or,
Hmm.
the next round of valuation, something like that.
Hmm. Well said. And on that note, Dushyant, I just want to say what an incredible conversation this has been with you. I've been a two-term founder myself, and I know founders need a lot of support. It's a lonely job at the top and as a founder.
Absolutely.
And for people like you from Playbook, if you give them um, a willing ear to listen to their challenges, guide them in some of their challenges, and support them, not just financially, but with ideas and thoughts as well. That would be an incredible partner for any founder, I'm sure. Thank you for speaking to me and good luck to you.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.